Hello, everyone, and welcome to the ESU Happy Hour. Today's happy hour is going to be the ancient and global history of the book with Professor James Raven. My name is Dr. Karen Blair Brand. I'm the ESU Happy Hour Committee Chair and President of the ESU Central Pennsylvania branch, who is sponsoring today's happy hour. A few notes from Pennsylvania for you. Spring is around the corner, according to Punxsutawney Phil, our local resident groundhog. And basically have a happy Valentine's Day 1 week from today. Now back to our happy hour. Ideas for our happy hour programs come from our viewers and our ESU members. There will be a question and answer session right after Professor Raven's talk. You can submit your questions anytime using the Q&A and chat modules at the bottom of your Zoom screen. And after the program, please share your feedback and ideas for future happy hour programs via a survey that you will get sent via your email. We have 174 folks registered for today's program, and the branches with the most members registered are Central Florida, Greenwich, and New York City. Thank you very much. Now we'd like to introduce, with great pride and just a wonderful person, my colleague that's going to bring you today's program, Professor James Raven from Cambridge University. Last fall, I had the honor and privilege after the International Council meeting in Paris to do some traveling through England, and Professor James Raven invited a few of us to come and visit Cambridge University Magdalen College and their beautiful historic library, which is a great place to visit with all the history and the ancient books that are there. You would just want to reach out and grab them and pick one up and look at it. Also, I attended a high table with Professor James Raven and my ESU colleague, Nadia Ivanenko, from the Ukraine, who is a fellow right now at Oxford University. And that was James with a candlelight dinner and all the lovely people and the students there. I just felt like we were going back in time, and it was such a lovely time. So thank you for that invitation. And last year, Professor James Raven was one of our French speakers who traveled around to a number of branches here in the ESU to give a talk. And we thank you for that also, Professor Raven. Professor James Raven is the former chair of the ESU of the Commonwealth. He's a professor at the University of Cambridge and the National University of Norway, and was formerly at Oxford University. He's a fellow of the British Academy, and that's Magdalen College in Cambridge. And today, what he's going to bring you, he is a global authority on the book. Jim will walk and talk about the materials and physical structures of the book. He will basically go through how books have influenced people and places at contrasting times in our history, to rare titles and the libraries that house them. James has written over 14 books and has contributed to numerous articles and chapters. He is a regular contributor to newspapers, magazines, radio, and television. Jim, the stage is yours. Thank you so much for bringing this program. We can't wait till you get started. Thank you very much.
Well, hello, everybody. Thank you very much, Karen, for that very generous introduction. And I'm delighted to be with you, and also with the cocktail, which we've slightly renamed. Here we are, the Clover Club Book Club cocktail, which of course started its life at the Bellevue Stratford Hotel in Philadelphia, not very far from one of my favorite haunts in your wonderful country, the Library Company of Philadelphia. And it's actually, and I have to say this, very much part of the what I owe the ESU in terms of my work in the United States and my research going forward I wanted to say that Karen very kindly mentioned that I've been working for the ESU for many years, and it was an enormous honor to serve as the chair of the ESU of the Commonwealth, and as Karen said, to be the Evelyn Wrench speaker last year. But without the ESU, I really wouldn't have begun my research career or indeed have been at university. And it was because of a scholarship that was offered to me when, as a 17, 18-year-old, that I had the confidence to even apply for university. Coming from a family with no experience of higher education or of going to university, the ESU was absolutely transformational for me. And I want to take this opportunity to thank all of you for all the extraordinary work that you do for the ESU to give young people these exceptional opportunities and to give them the confidence to go forward as the ESU gave me. I'm now going to try and share my screen so that we can see. Bear with me. Oh dear. Bear with me. I'm trying to. That's not working. I'm sorry. I'm going to stop sharing. I'll try again. Let me try this one. No. I'm sorry, I'm having some difficulty. Let me try again. Share screen.
All you have to do is
Right, there we are at last. So here is can everyone, is that working for everybody? I hope that's working. I hope that's now. Can I
You're on
just
Yes,
set.
we can see it, James. It
Excellent.
looks
Good.
excellent.
Excellent. I'm so sorry. I'm technologically limited a little bit on my. Oh, good. There we are. So there, of course, is our headquarters, Dartmouth House, from where I set out as an 18-year-old. And this was my home. It's my second home, really. The then amazing branch of New Brunswick, New Jersey. It became my second home, and it was from here that I set out really to research the history of the book and books, now going back more than 30 years, to many different libraries in the United States. The Beinecke in Yale, the Sterling in Yale, the Houghton in Harvard, to the Newberry in Chicago, and to many individual private collections and institutions around. But it was always here that I returned, and it was here that I had so many ESU friends and continue to have ESU friends across the United States. And it was so good to go on that Evelyn Wrench speaker tour last year, where I met so many old friends and found so many new ones as well. But Karen mentioned where we're coming from this evening. I'm speaking to you from Cambridge. This is Magdalen. Very proud to have the longest river frontage of all the colleges. There is the first court. Karen mentioned its antiquity, built beginning, well, the college was begun really in the early 15th century. Most of these buildings were in the 15th century in the hall. They're completed in the 16th century. I thought you'd like to see where I'm coming from in terms of my rooms, coming up from up here. And Karen mentioned dining on high table. As she said, it's candlelit. This is, of course, during the day, but it's candlelit at night. And it was a great pleasure to host Karen and Nadia, and as we have other ESU friends here over the years. But as Karen said also, the heart of the college really is the Pepys building, which houses the collection of Samuel Pepys from the late 17th century. The closed windows that you see there, the shuttered windows on the first floor, British first floor, house the collection of his books. And we're very proud also to have been really to enter the 21st century with this extraordinary new library, which we built for students, for our undergraduates and graduates and all members of the college, and which we were extraordinarily proud, absolutely delighted, won the Sterling Prize for the best architectural building in Britain last year. It's an immensely successful building, and I thought I'd like to show you a little bit again of the modern Magdalen. You'll see the Pepys building here, the old Pepys building on the left, and our new library on the right, which houses the college library. And you'll see it's light and airy. The students love it, and it's, I think, as I said, we're exceptionally proud that it won this prize for being the best new building in Britain in 2023. It's open 24 hours a day, access through there through a security card, so students can use it at any time. And it contrasts and complements, I think, the Pepys building. So I thought I'd show that in terms of the context of the housing of books. As you can see here from the date of when the library arrived after Pepys' death, he bequeathed it to his college, and the building was completed in 1724. So we're thrilled that we are significantly celebrating that building now in 2024. Inside the library, Pepys, as you may know, was secretary to the Royal Navy, as well as being the most famous diarist, perhaps, in the English language. And because of his role with the Navy and with timber and with ships, he was able to ask ship's carpenter to create what are here the original bookcases, and now they're they are the first glass-fronted bookcases built in Britain, still housing his collection of 2,000 books today. But all of this culminates in my most recent book, which I can't claim entire credit for at all. I'm very much the conductor or the organizer, I suppose, of the Oxford History of the Book, which I've edited, which brings together 14, perhaps 15 scholars from around the world to think about what a book actually means in its history, going back to ancient times and through to the present, globally, to contrast the history of the book in the East and the West. And just a quick preview, this isn't published yet, but it's coming out in March. Another trying to bring together scholars in an endeavour is this book, which looks at global exchanges of knowledge, and again is trying to contrast what we know about books and modes of communication all around the world to give a better sense of what a book might be from a variety of different perspectives. So, what is a book? We probably think, don't we, that we know what a book is. It looks often like this. At least old books look like this. It has words, it has a cover, it has a spine, it might carry pictures. If it's a work of reference, it will probably include a contents list and an index. And we instinctively think, I think, that it will be printed, and it will be in this form of having the spine, the pages together, known really as a codex. Jumping ahead, I suppose, to my conclusion in terms of what a book is, I would want to offer 4 characteristics which we might want to think about. The first is that it is graphic. A book is graphic. It has something in there which is written and printed, designed particularly in a graphic way. The second is that the second characteristic is that it's legible. We can read it. You can't have a book unless you can read it. You often have books on shelves which are unread, but nevertheless, there's a possibility of reading them. And the third characteristic, which is really important, is that it is portable. Because after all, you could have something that's graphic and legible, but it could easily be a monument or something that's static. But to be portable makes it a book. And the fourth characteristic, it seems to me, is that it also has to be durable. Now, books don't always last very long, but they're made with the intention, at least, of lasting for as long as it could be to read for a while. And some, of course, are deliberately made to last for a very long time indeed, as we shall see. So I'd offer 4 characteristics of what a book might be: graphic, legible, portable, and durable. But beyond that, what fascinates me, and fascinates me in terms of looking at the history going way, way back many centuries, and also around the world, is the materiality of the book, of what the book can actually be made of. After all, a book, in a sense, is a vehicle for the communication of ideas, as a vehicle, as a container of entertainment, of instruction. But it can be contained in a very different material form. These next two pictures, in a perhaps a slightly sad way, in a way, encapsulate my entire lecturing career or talking about the history of the book. But I thought I'd show them to you because it's also a way of thinking about the role of books. These 5 questions are derived from the questions of someone who's often thought of as the founder of communication studies, Harold Laswell. And he asked these 5 questions: who says what, by which channel, to whom, and with what effect? Who are the originators of the book or of the communicative process? The writers, the authors, the manufacturers, the printers, the scribes. They say what? What's the material form? And that's what we'll be looking at today. What form is the book? Does the book comprise? Is it a book? Is it a magazine? Is it a newspaper? Is it something completely different, as we shall see in a moment? By which channel? How does it get around? How does it get to the readers? How do we buy it? Are there bookshops? Are there peddlers? Do we find it nowadays in a more digital means? To whom? Who are the readers, and how do we identify the readers? How do we know who the readers were? Were they mostly men? Were they women, children, different groups? How do we define the reader? Look at different questions of literacy, look at who could afford a book. How could we actually think about who readers are? And finally, with what effect? The most difficult question of all. What is the practice of reading? What do we get out of reading? How do people read? What do you need to read? Particular ability, perhaps, particular light, particular comfort, particular motivations to read. And do we read differently on different occasions? And what makes us read differently? What are our modes? And what one can do is construct quite interesting timelines, starting with ancient times on the left, going right through to the present on the right, and thinking about the introductions of different forms of whos, different forms of whats, different forms of the channels, and how we actually look at the reader and with what effect. But let's go back, and also finally, just one point also, as the development of the history of the book has continued in recent years, the national unit has become a favorite form for writing a very large number of new histories of the book, which tackle the questions that I've just been delineating. And I've just put up here a selection of the histories of the book in different parts of the world. But I've also put it up because it's a deliberate caution, because of course the book is quintessentially not limited to a particular nation. One could think, for example, that in what one might think of a golden era of literature, the age of Shakespeare to Milton in Britain, the vast majority of books, that were read, and certainly all scholarly books, were imported books. They weren't books that were produced in Britain. There were a few books produced in Britain, but the majority of those on the shelves of learned libraries were those imported from mainland Europe. And they weren't, of course, most of them in the vernacular tongue either. It's only in the 18th century that that Britain becomes a major book exporter, and that the majority of books are in English when produced in Britain. And similarly, you could think of the other histories here, the history of the book in America, for example, reliant on the importation of books largely from Britain, but also from other European countries, actually quite a while after the early Republic. It's not until the 1810s and 1820s that there is substantial takeoff in terms of publishing and printing in the United States itself. Books are quintessentially livres sans frontières, books without boundaries. They cross boundaries. And that's one of the things which makes the ongoing question that I'm asking today about the history of books so fascinating, because it is a transnational global history, a history of the interaction of different peoples through books which travel vast distances and which have a very long history. So that pile of books that I showed a little while ago begins to look a little limited in terms of what we might think about in terms of a global and ancient history of the book. And here is just a selection, a little preview of some of the types of book I'm going to take you through in a moment, to give some sense of the range of the different materialities of what a book might be if we really stretch ourselves and think according to those 4 characteristics that I suggested earlier. The book which is graphic, the book which is legible, which is portable, and which is durable. It might go back 3,000 years to here, to an ancient Assyrian tablet, many of which were, hundreds of which were stored in what was a library on shelves with early cuneiform, you can see incised into the stone, to the modern tablet. Well, it's not actually, that one doesn't look quite so modern, does it? But anyway, it's a representation of a modern tablet. To here on the far right, ancient Inca quipus, a form of a book in many respects, a memory device, a string memory device. It is a narrative device whereby, we'll see it later, one can remember things through the different knotted forms and indeed the color and the touch. It's an object of extraordinary scholarly interest at the moment. Down here on the left-hand side, a Chinese bamboo book, a scroll book, a concertinaed book. We'll look at that again in a little. Or how about this one in the middle here? A buffalo hide from the Dakota people, often called winter cants, which you can see the graphic elements here, the ideograms in the center, counting here in terms of harvests and other seasonal events, to a printing block here on the far right, just to remind us that things can also be printed in forms which are other than paper or parchment, which we'll also come on to. So let's go back in time and start with what might be perhaps one of the earliest type of objects which we might call a book. I have to explain that this photograph is actually of one object. What you're seeing there is a tiny, it's 0.7 times 4 centimeter, tiny objects, a little unbaked clay tablet from Sumeria. It's in the Ashmolean Library, in the Ashmolean Museum in Oxford, and you're seeing a photograph of its front and its back and its sides all together. It has names, barley and wheat calculations, with a total of the calculations on the reverse. There's a good deal of scholarly debate about whether this actually represents a language or not, but it's certainly a proto-cuneiform system of recording, and again on something which you can carry around, which you can read again and again, and which can be stored with others like it in a library. Let's look at another example. Here are oracle bones, arguably the oldest form of Chinese books, going back to 1300 BC. The diviner, who is going to foretell the future fate or immediate fate of the emperor, every 10 days uses a hot iron. You can see where the cracks are caused by the hot iron incised, and from the type of crack that is created by the incision, the prognostication is given. And you can see on the detail on the right-hand side here, the writing against the cracks, which give a sense of what the fate of the emperor is. I suspect somehow the fate was always a good one, but nevertheless, there are a variety of different forms. And again, it was forms of evaluation of the endeavor with the hot stick. And again, these were put together and shelved or stored at least as a type of book. Here we have from the British Museum one of many little flakes of limestone known as ostrakon. It comes from Thebes from, again, similar time, a very different part of the world, 13th century BC. And on here, interestingly, is the final lines of a very classic poem, The Tale of Sinui. if you look at the red dots here, you can just see the red dots, they indicate the end of the lines of the poem. These fragments, again, were portable and legible, and certainly meant to last. This is also an early fascinating from an Assyrian, a part of the one of the great mosaic panels from Babylonia, from the Assyrian palace in Nineveh, which is currently displayed in the British Museum's extraordinary series of panels. But it's also an early representation of the book actually being written. And fascinatingly, we've got here on the right-hand side 2 scribes using 2 different forms of writing and of creating a book. They're actually recording war booty, which is shown here, after one of an Assyrian campaign, actually by King Sennacherib. But the 2 scribes, one of the scribes you can see here is using a stylus on a papyrus scroll. The other is incising on a wax tablet. And the early representations, we'll see a few more in a moment, the early representations of the creation and the use of books gives us another clue of the sort of variety and the functions that books continue to have. Very few ancient Greek books survive in original manuscripts, but here is a Greek papyrus fragment which has the earliest known extracts from the elements. Let me see if I can show this of Euclid. It almost takes us back, doesn't it, to the schoolroom. This particular part is probably written as a school exercise, concerns Pythagoras' theorem on the relationship between the sides of a right-angled triangle, one of the earliest passages in the book, and dating here to about 200 AD. But of course, post-dating the original work of Pythagoras by some 900 years. Moving away from papyrus, we have here an example again of a completely different form of material book, an unfolded Chinese bamboo concertina, again, well before Christ, for 400 centuries before, but again showing a very different form of material object. Going back again to papyrus, this is one of the earliest Christian Gospels we know of, kept on papyrus. The text also, fascinatingly, one can show, I think, on a detail here, with very clear chapter divisions shown. The excavations at Pompeii and the wonderful villa mosaics include many representations of the use of books and the creation of different books. This one is a very interesting example, which comes from the villa of a Roman businesswoman, a very wealthy Roman businesswoman, Julia Felix. It's decorated with the different types of writing materials. The form of a papyrus roll, you can see there on the left, with an ink pot and a pen, and 2 different types of writing tablets. Here, one here, here with an incisor for wax, and a more solid one there on the right. In Britain itself, we've got some extraordinary examples of book tablets. This one here, which found in Hadrian's Wall, known as the Vindolana tablet. It's the oldest surviving handwritten document in Britain, again between the 1st and the 2nd centuries AD. Let us move into what I suppose we think of as the glories of the parchment era, of the great manuscripts of the Middle Ages. And here we have on the left a 6th century Syriac manuscript, one of the earliest illuminated gospel books, and on the right a 9th century manuscript of the Sacra Parallela, well, let's have a look at it in more detail. Actually, we can. There's the 6th century one, which is held in the Lorenziana Library in Florence, an extraordinary place in which to work. As many of you may have been able to visit Florence and see this library, and the privilege of working there is a very great one. I do regret, however, that they, at the end of a working morning, even when I was there, one of the hours were really quite strictly limited. Without warning, they ring an enormous bell over your head, which can give you something of a jolt when you're deeply admiring the books that you're using there. This is the 9th century Sacra Parallela again, decorated with over 1,000 marginal illustrations, some which are believed to be the illuminators and the writers of the book itself. These, of course, are extraordinarily valuable works in their own right at the time, and we have here, particularly from the Byzantine Empire, some extraordinary opulent material books. This one, which was made in the 6th century, known as the Codex Brixanius, is extraordinarily opulent, and you can see that the parchment has been dyed purple. The color is considered imperial, and the writing is in a form of silver material. It's been made from this silver, which is deemed only in expense less than that writing in gold. It's currently held in Brescia. I wanted to give you a sense also of the expansion of these early medieval manuscripts and the different forms in which they're taking in the creation of books. And this is to give you a sense of the Slavonic manuscript book. Decoration here. It is script. It might look printed, but it's script, a very early Cyrillic script, and illustrating also the link between Byzantium and Russia in terms of the type of style of an early sacred book. For those of you who've ever visited Ravenna, this will be familiar. The extraordinary mosaics of the imperial capital of Ravenna. This 5th century mosaic is again a wonderful illustration of the usage and storage of books. Here we've got St. Lawrence on the right, holding his book. He's about, alas, to suffer the torments of the gridiron that you see in the middle. He's holding the gospel in his left hand there against it. And there you can see on the left-hand side that looks like a sort of cupboard, and the storage of the books there, in early illustration of storage.
The third floor from 2:30 to 3:30.
What would he use? What would he use?
What would he use? The space. I think they're just having like a meeting or something.
One of the
Excuse me, there's you folks don't have your audio off, please.
This is the largest manuscript book that we know of. It's known as the Codex Gigas, or the Devil's Bible, because of some of the extra illustrations which go beyond the Bible as well. It's currently, well, has been for many centuries, kept in Stockholm. And in order to make this extraordinary book, it's 89 centimeters by 40 centimeters wide, of about 330 folios, which in terms of the parchment, the hides of the cows that are required to do this, it took about, it's estimated, about 510 cows to actually create the book. Gives you some sense of why they are so valuable and expensive. But don't let's confine ourselves to to Western Europe. It's important to think about the global reach of the book, and also in terms of its early times. The beautiful Garima Gospels, written on goat skin in the early Ethiopian language of Geats, also difficult to date exactly, but somewhere between 330 and 690 AD. one of the earliest examples or so of bookbinding with the pages in there, and they're very beautifully illustrated. There's one other example I can give you of the Bible in Ethiopia as well, giving us some sense. This is up later, but again at about the same time as the Western Reformation in the 16th century. And going also through to the Americas, some of the early earlier Christian sacred works translated here into Nahuatl, or the type of book which becomes a talisman and a book which is worthy in its own right, has its own perhaps semi-magical properties. This is the Cumhdach of St. Columba's Psalter, made in Ireland in the 11th century, but it was designed to hold the 6th century Psalter manuscript that was traditionally associated with St. Columba. And it was known as the Cumhdach as the Battler, because enshrined within it, kept within it, it was taken onto the battlefield as a talisman, sort of a book of religion that was believed to aid soldiers in their bid to butcher their enemies. I'll give you one example also of the miraculous book here. Here is the lovely village of Fonjou down in the southwest, well, the south of France, in the Languedoc, and an illustration here from an altarpiece in Italy of an event in Fonjou where over the Cathars and the Albigensians confronting the Catholic Church. And here you can see a panel depicting the moment that the manuscript of Dominic's writings in defense of the Catholic Church proved its holiness by jumping out of the fire. Both the manuscripts of the Cathars, the books, you can see a book being held up here on the right by the Cathars, and of the Catholic books are put into a bonfire. I'll give you some sense of what happens here, of the levitation of the book, which miraculously, the Catholic book miraculously comes above the bonfire, proving the belief in the miraculous powers of books, something that survives well into the Renaissance. Now, because of time, and I don't want to overrun my time here, I'm going to run through some of the next slides. But of course, this will be very familiar as a turning point in terms of the history of the book, the introduction of the printing press in Europe. And it's very important to talk about it in terms of the printing by movable type. It's not just printing, it's printing a particular form of printing. And we've got many interesting early illustrations from the 16th, 17th, 18th centuries of the printing house. Here you can see the compositors with the small pieces of type in the background, using the printing press here, the inking of the pages once the type is composed onto the form, onto the pages. Creating here, we always think perhaps of the most beautiful early production of printing by movable type, of the Gutenberg Bible, and of its importance in terms of printing here, in terms of the spread of the vernacular, not just printing in Latin and major languages, but also local languages as well. A Bible written in the vernacular. I'm doing this for a very particular reason, because you can see this is a written form here, and of how early print, the Gutenberg Bible on the right, emulates that form of script on the left. Again, a wonderful illustration of the busyness of the creation of books with all its various functions in Western Europe in the 15th and 16th century. This is an 18th century version of it. And a really important, if I was to pick out one important comment to make about this technology, it would be that if Gutenberg, or in Britain Caxton in the late 15th century, was somehow magically to come forward to the end of the 18th century, when this print was made, they would recognize the same sort, as you can have seen from the contrast I've just given, comparisons that I've just given, they would have seen the same sort of working environment. It's not until the powered printing press of the early 19th century that you have a complete technological transformation. The technology of Caxton is still very much the technology of Dr. Johnson or of Benjamin Franklin when he was a printer in the 18th century, fundamentally. typeface design has changed a little bit. Illustrative copperplate engraving and the like have moved on, but the fundamental technology of book creation, and I can talk a little bit later about these processes, is the same. I rather like this demonstration of that. This is the painting from the middle of the 19th century, illustrating Caxton here, standing here, showing off a specimen of printing by movable type to the king, Edward IV, and his two young sons, of course, going to be the princes of the Tower. What I love about this painting is the very sinister appearance between Caxton and Edward IV of the then Duke of York, Duke of Gloucester, Richard of Gloucester, who becomes Richard III, leering behind Caxton. The dissemination, that third question that I had in terms of pushing books around Europe, developed during this period from peddlers to fixed site retailing to the development of bookshops. And also of circulating libraries by the 18th century, something that I'm passing over very quickly here, but that's a very important aspect of the history of reading and of books and the development of the library in this period. And also, again, to say that we mustn't think of it just even in terms of Western Europe. The development here we have of the very first books created in Cyrillic, printed in Cyrillic by Skorana in the 16th century, first Bibles in Latvian, the creation of books which are all really about encounter. Here we have the Mamusi Wanuta Pana Tamwe, or Biblum Gob, which was the English Bible translated into Algonquin. And we have many examples of translations and the form of print trying to replicate a local colloquial language. Here we have an example of Mohawk. And similarly, in terms of the activity of missionaries around the world, a mixture sometimes of printing and script to create different forms of books for different types of encounter and reading experiences. The first known record of a Maori woman reading here, for example, from the middle of the 19th century. Different forms also in Central America, and back to that Inca quipu that I talked about earlier, and the encounter between that type of technology in terms of a narrative, which this form of a book was allowed in courts in the 16th century as testimony for trials accepted by missionaries, accepted by Franciscan monks and early officials. It wasn't until 1580 that it was actually banned, but before then it was accepted on par with different types of script and print. There's again the very fascinating type of recording of the Lakota and Dakota peoples' winter counts. And also around the world, we mustn't forget the extraordinary illustrations in South Asia, East Asia. Here, a wonderful example of these largely illustrative Hindu accounts, richly illustrated, often very valuable, again, portable, materially very interesting, and durable, meant to last. I'm going to jump a little bit ahead because I just want to make two closing points before I hand over to any questions. And that is that one of the things that thinking about a global perspective in the book does for us is to make us check some of the assumptions that we make. There is an assumption we make about the superiority of printing by movable type, which we were just seeing in terms of the creation of Caxton and Gutenberg. And here is an early Korean example of a replica of early Korean printing by movable type, as you can see, which predates by many centuries that in the Western Europe. But it's not just the question of it predating Western European printing by movable type. It's also trying to think about the contrast between other types of printing. This is printing by blocks. And here you can see wooden blocks, 81,258 wooden blocks created, stored in total in a Buddhist monastery. These were cut between 1236 and 1251. And these 81,000 blocks, if you've got enough room to actually store them, the technology involved here, rather than printing by movable type, but actually by carving and incising a printed block, the block being printed all in one, can often be much, much more efficient than the form that we have of printing in the West, or we had from Caxton through Gutenberg and the like, of small pieces of movable type, which had to be all taken apart after the printing of a book and all put back together, composed together carefully, very inefficient way of reproducing a book. So long as you've got the storage capacity, then this is a much more efficient way of printing. And also fascinatingly, because of the age of these blocks, if you wanted to make a new edition, print a new edition of a book that was, say, I don't know, 300, 400 years old, you could do so. You could take it out again and create a new edition, even though several centuries has passed since its original printing. So thinking about as an example of the little movable box, it's not always the most efficient way of printing. And the global perspective, there they are all in the global perspective gives us a new sense, I think, of the different technologies involved and the different efficiencies. Even in this age, as we see here, of the introduction of steam technology, power printing in the 19th century, which had before our own digital age, such a transformative aspect on book in its reproduction. I'm just going to leave you with one final thought about the production of books and in its modern age. Something that I think is really fascinating is the sensory experience of the book. I've been particularly interested in the last couple of years in thinking about the tactility of the book, this materiality I've been talking about, and how we somehow, yes, of course, we use our eyes to read and we use our ears to hear a reading from a book, something that was very important in a period of early semi-literacy, that many more people had an experience of a book from hearing it being read than actually reading it. But beyond reading and hearing, we can also have the touch of a book. We can feel it as we, not just braille books, but actually the actual importance of feeling and holding a book. And we can also have a sense of perhaps even tasting a book, of kissing a book, of at least putting our fingers and licking to go from one page to another. We can think also of how that Umberto Eco's The Name of the Rose, what sinister ending that has, the poisoning by taste. But we can also perhaps smell a book. So we have these other, or certainly smell a library, and we have these other sensory experiences. So I'll just slightly, for a lighter note, leave you with thoughts about book sniffing. The smell, it says here, the way book nerds get high was the best thing I've ever inhaled, better than petrol, better than pen markers, better than Sharpie pens. You can buy, if you want, the library candle from the British Library. Enjoy a warm, evocative journey. Rediscover the scent of the library in your own bathroom from a natural wax candle that has been handcrafted in England. Some people are saying, ladies and gentlemen, go and buy some books, sniff them, and most importantly, read them. Nothing smells like a book, we learn. And finally, you can even, in this day, recreate the smell of your own book if a Kindle is feeling like you're missing something from your own reading experience. Have you been avoiding ebooks because they just don't spell right? Book lovers everywhere have resisted digital books because they still don't compare to the experience of reading. Well, now you can read your ebooks on a Kindle or a smartphone using your favorite reading app because we have a spray, the smell of books, that brings back that real book smell you miss so much. I'm going to leave you with that last slide while it's still up there. I'm just going to get from the other room because the smell was so great. An example. If I can now stop sharing my screen, stop sharing. There we are. That I was delighted when I gave a lecture only a couple of months ago in Mexico City, that one of my members of the audience came with me and actually brought with me this bottle of spray, which is exactly that. It's extremely strong, but it is to recreate the smell of books while we're all sitting on our screen. Perhaps I should give it a quick squirt from my books behind, and then we'll all enjoy that particular aroma that we enjoy so much from books. But thank you very much indeed for your attention.
Thank you, Professor James Raven. That was such a fascinating talk about the history of the book, and with so many graphic pieces that you shared with us today. It was just wonderful. Now, I just want to remind people we're going to go into the Q&A part of the program, and please make sure you submit your questions in the Q&A or chat module as James is toasting to everyone after his talk here. So let's see what some of the questions are. First, I would just like to say from the Charlottesville branch, there was a note up there earlier that they love and support the rare books, and they just wanted to say hello, Professor James Raven from Charlottesville, Virginia.
Wonderful.
The Charlottesville branch. And let's see here. Hello, Professor Raven. One of the most famous books is the First Folio, published 400 years ago. One was auctioned by Christie in 2020 for $10 million. Have you had an opportunity to see a First Folio in person?
Yes, I have. Absolutely magnificent. And it's wonderful that this year to celebrate, for those of you interested, those who've seen it, that in this year, a facsimile has been issued, which is really a very, very beautiful object in its own right by Oxford University Press, and it's a wonderful object to see. It's fascinating in so many ways, not only in terms of the contents of the First Folio, but also, of course, of the illustration at the beginning that's so famous in terms of the alleged representation of Shakespeare. But the first folio is an extraordinary edition. It's amazing to think also of the prices that some of the most the rarest books raise to. It's not something I described here, but the valuation of the book itself is an extraordinary issue too. The differences that there are around the world in terms of the valuing of a book is a very interesting and contrasting question.
Right, that comes from Jeff Schnabel from our Kansas City branch, who's also a member of our Happy Hour committee. And there is a somebody typed in Professor Raven, Richard Kelly. It might be somebody that you know. They don't identify where they're from. But the next submission here is Edward Corey. I wonder what the impact of some of the oldest books, such as the Prissy Papyrus and the book, I'm not sure if I'm going to say this right, but Patahoptep, dated around 2000 BCE. Didn't the earliest books have common sacrosanct element that carries over to the Torah, Quran, and Bible, if that makes any sense?
Yes, it does. No, it does. And I think that it's really important to think about the particular groups that have access to the books. In some cases, a book is for a very confined and very specific and confined audience, and indeed was kept away deliberately from other groups. It was their own particular possession, and it had in its own right, a cultural demarcation. Whereas for and of course, in terms also of books that were primarily designed for recording important, possibly even secret, but certainly information which was not to be made public. And so there is an issue here in terms of thinking about the motivation for making books and their potential audiences. What I've just been saying contrasts with books which were made for very deliberately were made for a much wider audience, and indeed were made for propaganda or for spreading ideas, which is why we think of the 16th century particularly. We think of this, it's an interesting issue, of the extent to which the printing press was able to support the Reformation, and later also forms of intellectual revolution and scientific revolution, deliberately because such books were intended to be transformative in terms of reaching different people, different audiences, the development of the vernacular and the like, and therefore very soon became objects of great suspicion to church and state, and hence greater attempts at censorship and control over books because of the possibility that they were going to reach the wrong people in the eyes of those who were attempting to control them. So it's a very interesting and important issue over many centuries about the extent to which books are either private and important and secure objects against almost commodities which are designed to inform much greater audiences.
Thank you, James. The next one is from Peter Smith. Cockle your talk about the development of paper, without which printing books would be much harder. That's just his statement, but what's your reaction to that?
I got the first part about, I didn't quite get the question, but the printing of books on paper, yes, and the development of paper, the manufacture of paper, becomes a hugely important, as it still is, and is an extraordinarily important part of the history of books. Paper, of course, is not universal, and what I wanted to stress was different sorts of materials, and we could look at much more detail about the history of papyrus, of printing on silk, of in South Asia the use of talipot leaves, the writing on leaves, and there's quite a range of other forms of material. But paper, after parchment, and the importance of parchment mustn't be forgotten either. The importance of paper from fairly early days, particularly in China, and then through importance of paper production in Europe, is absolutely fundamental to that history of the printed book from the 16th century onwards. However, there are important sort of other issues that you have to think about. One is the quality of the paper. So, for example, just to give you a quick example, in Britain, most of the paper that is used for printing is imported until the 18th century, when British, and particularly first of all Scottish and then English paper mills and paper manufacture develops. Before that, for most of the printing done in England in the late 15th century and through the 16th century, it's mostly imported paper, quality paper, from Italy or from the Netherlands. And there's an interesting issue about why that should be. All of this paper, of course, is created from rags. It's not until the 19th century that you have wood paper. Many people think that the paper comes from wood. No, it's not wooden pulp until the 19th century, after a bit of interesting experiment with straw. But in the early periods in this paper, this is made from rags. It's rag collection, which is then macerated and pulped down into making paper. And you need very, very good quality water for that, other conditions as well. And so there are only particular places that can make paper that is of high enough quality for printing. And the history of that and its development, its geographical spread, and where the paper comes from is a really important question in relation to this history of the book, and of two of the things that I said about the durability of the book, and the quality of its printing, of its legibility.
Thank you, James. Another statement from Robert Franklin: Holbrook Jackson's The Anatomy of the Bibliomania is a wonderful work on all aspects of experiencing books.
It is indeed, and bibliomania, of course, which the term bibliomania, a mania for books, almost a disease, which some of us, I'm afraid, have. I plead guilty to. Well, can you plead guilty to having a disease? I don't know. That's an interesting issue. Is book collecting inherited, or is it something that comes from you're catching it from others? The term bibliomania coming from the 17th century. It's bibliomanie, from the French, and you can find it in other languages. Bibliomania, mania for collecting, is there from, you know, 16th, certainly 17th century, 18th century. Some of the great book collectors and astonishing collections that are built up. And the book that was mentioned there is indeed a great read. There are others that go back to talk about the age of Dibdin, one others, some of the great book collectors, and the problems inherent in ordering and keeping and cataloging a collection as well. That's a whole other and fascinating area of the history of books in terms of the history of libraries, its collecting, its ordering, and the problems that many of us have in terms of storing our books.
Quite true. Okay, statement from Vernon Danielson. I want a 1.5 hour presentation to get all of what Professor Raven knows. All right, so Dana Ivy from New York City, I believe. She's one of our Shakespeare folks and a wonderful person with acting. Wonder why little talk about the widespread use of books, scrolls in parentheses, in ancient Egypt. Scribes frequently shown on papyrus and in stone carvings.
Absolutely. Yes, absolutely. It's another, you know, I was just showing rushing through a whole variety of different examples there. But indeed, and I think fascinating to compare the illustrations of scribes and papyrus in ancient Egypt with, you may have just seen flashing past in my presentation, to Mayan men sitting around what it looks very, very much like an early codex, a Mayan codex that they're examining. It's actually an illustration from a Mayan pot, from a Mesoamerican pot. It's around the side of this, and so it's a drawing on a ceramic. But again, it's a representation, like we were saying about the Roman representations, and these, as was just mentioned, lots of fascinating drawings of scribes and the use of papyrus on ancient Egyptian materials, and more that's being discovered all the time as well.
Thank you, James. Phil Williams from the Charlottesville branch, I believe he's still president. He's asking, can you speak to the etymology of the word book? And we have a couple more statements and that'll be it. We'll wrap up shortly here.
Yes, I mean, I wish I could recall exactly. It is important. Book and bark. There's some discussion about that. The word bark from a tree, of the use of it as a writing material. Book, bark, and similar. I would I do say something about that. If I can puff my own book, in my book, What is the History of the Book? I do say something about the etymology of the word, and I wish I could remember more. But I know that in terms of the discussion about or the debate about the word, book and bark is absolutely fundamental.
Great, thank you, Professor Raven. Russell McAllister is asking, do you consider the American colonial era samplers as a sort of book?
That's well, they've been wonderful questions, and that is a really interesting question. In the room that you can just see through at the back of me here, there are some samplers, and samplers, of course, were wonderful examples of the colonial American sampler, but also they were the sort of thing which was commonplace. I mean, it was part of what so many, usually young girls, did to learn their alphabet or to embroider their alphabet and numbers in schools in the 18th and 19th century. I have my 3 great-grandmothers sampler just in the room next door. And they are, in a sense, a type of book, in as much as they are certainly portable and legible and made to last. And so they would, in some senses, be on the verge of it. The only thing I suppose that that predicates against them really is that they are something which often is designed for hanging on a wall, for being as it were sort of resident and not moving. But yeah, I think we can if we're going to count many of the things which in a somewhat teasing and provocative way I was counting as a book, then I think the sampler counts as a book. Yeah.
Okay, so Marianne Bradley, she states, hello, Professor Raven, greetings from Indianapolis, Indiana. My friend Rebecca Romney was unavailable to accept my invitation to your talk due to being in California for business. She assured me she uses one or more of your books as her preferred reference material. It is possible you will give this talk. Is it possible you will give this talk sometime or anytime soon that we might hear you again? Many thanks for Marianne Bradley. And then Vernon Danielson is saying, one of the best happy hours we've had. It's not kudos to the Philadelphia branch. Central Pennsylvania is in State College, PA at Penn State University. We are in the center of the state, not on the eastern side of the state. So Philadelphia is one branch and ESU Central Pennsylvania is in the center of the state. And let me see if there's anything else here. Kathy Anderson, she's stating, what was the first book to have page numbers? And I think that's the last one that we can give us a brief one on that one, James.
Well, thank you. First of all, thank you very much. Thank you very much for all the questions and those very kind comments. I'll do my best to answer any other comments as well if people want to send them to me. And it's been so wonderful to be with everybody, really has. And I hope it's at least as long as we've been drinking well with our Club Clover cocktail, that's good. I wish I could answer that. I wish I could answer quickly I wish I could quickly answer that last question. I don't think I know the answer to it. It's a very good question. Somebody out there would know when page numbers were there. Certainly, I mean, one of the things about printing and the composition, the construction of a book is that it's not only the reader that needs to know a page number, but it's also the person who's putting it together. And for that, there are often what's called signatures, which you've probably seen for binders to help them. But one thing very, very quickly that's important about the advent of printing as opposed to scribal work is that once you have a printed book in the 16th century, all the copies are more or less identical, not quite, but more or less identical, which you hadn't had before. So, for example, a scholar in Rotterdam can converse or write to a scholar in Prague or in Lisbon, and they can say, we've got a copy of Erasmus. I'm fascinated by what he says on page 36 of this particular edition, and they can all turn to page 36. So with printing, page numbers become much more important. But when you actually have the page numbers on there, I don't know. This is one of the wonderful things about doing this. You're asked questions and you think that's a really, really important question. I don't know the answer. I'll go and try and look that one up. I'll try and do a bit of research on that, but someone I'm sure will know the answer. Thank you very much for the question, and thank you for all the other questions and comments this evening.
And James, I have one question for you myself. What is the oldest book at Magdalen College? What does it date back to? Do you have any idea in that great library?
It's, again, an interesting question about libraries, of course, is because libraries are accumulations of earlier libraries. And one of the collections we have books that we have early medieval books, either through some very early medieval books in the Pepys collection, but also from the old library itself. But we're certainly going to we've got quite a number of very early medieval manuscript books, in addition to some magnificent early printed books.
Thank you very much, Professor James Raven. That was fascinating, wonderful, and we're wanting more. Now I'm going to turn our program over to our Executive Director, Karen Karpowitz, in New York City at our headquarters, and she will do our outro for us. Take it away, Karen.
Thank you, James. It's always a pleasure, and it's always a pleasure to hear someone talk about the impact of the English-speaking union on their life and their careers, which is a very common thing. I want to thank the Central Pennsylvania branch for putting this together. I think it's a great opportunity to have you on tape. So now that we have this in posterity for anybody that wants to hear this wonderful speech. It's springtime, so it's Shakespeare time at the ESU. All of you in your branches, you should be looking out for your local Shakespeare competition. And those of you who are interested in coming to New York the weekend of April the 12th, we have an adult package available for you to come to New York to Lincoln Center for the National Shakespeare Competition. We do invite you. Thank you again, and I hope to see you all back here on February 28th when the program will be hosted by the Central Florida branch, and we'll be talking about the Kinder transport during World War II into Great Britain. A very important, very fascinating topic. Thank you again and have a lovely evening.